Hi church, hope you're all doing great, and it's just a joy to be able to share with you on these days some words from the book of Ruth. And it's such an encouragement when we find a book like Ruth which speaks to our present situation. Hope you found encouragement if you've looked at Gideon and Habakkuk, and now looking at this in detail. And so we're just reading from chapter 2, and so far we found out it's a book all about returning, how to live in the promises. And it's a book which shows that there are differences between Ruth and Orpah about how you move from a position outside of the promise to live in a position inside the promise. And just the other day we saw how Ruth just going about being a blessing opened the door for her to be blessed. And I don't know about you, but I'm hearing people are always saying, Pastor, what must I do to be blessed? Or how can I be blessed? Well, the number one thing you can do is be a blessing. When you bless others, God opens the door for blessing in your life. But let's carry on reading from chapter 2 and see if there's anything else that we can learn from the life of Ruth. This is where it says, I'm just going to read a few verses. Verse 14. And so Ruth's been gleaning in the fields and come to Boaz's attention. At the mealtime, Boaz said to her, Come out here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some of the stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley as she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. And she carried it back to town to her mother-in-law. And when her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered, Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten. Her mother-in-law asked her, Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed is the man who took notice of you. So Ruth's been working hard. She's been working in the field, and there's a law in the book of Leviticus and in Deuteronomy which talks about how harvesters, once they finish harvesting, that they are to wait and allow the poor, the widowed, the fatherless and the foreigners in the land to come onto the field and to glean, to go through all that which is left over and take that which they can find to feed them. And this is what she's doing. She is counted one of the poorest of the poor. When we look at this story, yes, she's the hero of the story, the heroine. And yet of all the people in the story, Ruth has the least power. In the eyes of everybody in the world around her, she is the weakest. She is the most vulnerable person there is in this story. And yet she's the heroine. And so let me just encourage you straight off. You may feel you are the most vulnerable person you know. You may feel like you're a victim. You may feel like everything is against you. But you can still be the heroine of the story. You can still be the one who everything else is written about in the end. Ruth becomes the heroine even though she has the least power and the least influence of anything in this story. Now we carry on and we've heard how Boaz treats her. And the first thing we notice is this, that Boaz doesn't treat her like a beggar. He gets her to sit with the men and all those who are working. He doesn't treat her as if she's the one who comes gleaning afterwards, but he treats her like she's one of the harvesters. So in her serving, she's been blessed. And then the blessing opens up for her favor on her life. And the favor on her life elevates her status. It elevates her identity. She's no longer seen as the beggar. She's seen as one of the workers. But it doesn't stop there. Boaz gives her something to eat, which he didn't need to do. But afterwards, as she's doing other bits and pieces, he personally speaks to the men and says, what I want you to do is allow her to glean amongst you guys. Normally, we would wait until all the harvest is done before we let anyone onto the field. But I'm asking you, let her glean. And why don't you pull out a bit of stalks here and there? See, there was already grace for the poorest to come amongst them. The grace of God to say to Israel, you must look after the vulnerable. That grace was already there. But now Boaz goes and adds grace upon grace and said, actually, I'm going to ask you to do even more for her. You don't have to do it by the law, but now as the owner of the field, not only am I elevating her, I'm putting grace upon her. Can I say to you now, when you gave your life to Jesus Christ, you may have been the most vulnerable person in the world. He didn't just elevate you and give you a new status, but he began to put grace upon your life. Today, you are a child of God who may be working very hard like Ruth was and feel like the poorest of the poor. But he comes and puts grace upon you, as it tells us in John chapter 1 and verse 18. Grace upon grace. Father, I pray now that everyone know that they are elevated and that they have grace upon grace in their lives. The Lord bless you. Have a great evening. Amen.